So we've talked about the origin of light from blackbody radiation. Basically, something is warm, the molecules are jiggling back and forth, and that's causing light to be emitted. You're changing electric and magnetic fields by the molecules moving. There's another thing that can happen, though, and that's what we call emission spectrum. Uh, the emission spectrum, and this is where it works better if you actually have a demo in class, which I normally do, and that shows this tube, and we look at it, only certain colors of light are given off. So it's a tube with a gas in it. You excite the gas, and it only gives off certain colors. Now your eye tries to put all those colors together into like one color, but you can actually put it through something and break it out and see that you really have different colors of light. Okay, so what's happening here is that you have an electron in an atom, and the electron normally wants to be at a low energy level, and if you bump it up to a high energy level, it's going to go down. But it can't just spiral down, it jumps from one energy to the other. Well, light carries energy, so when it jumps from one energy to the other, it gives off light. Okay, and so if it jumps from one level to another level, it gives off a certain wavelength of light, goes to another level, a different wavelength of light. Well, the wavelength of light related to the color of the light, and the bigger the jump, the shorter the wavelength, because shorter wavelength means higher energy. And so it turns out it works both ways. It absorbs light of only certain colors. So that means if you have a gas and you shine light through it, it's going to absorb certain colors of light. Or if you have this gas and it just gives off light, it gives off certain colors of light. And so there are gas discharge tubes that do this. That you just excite them, and the electrons go to high energy. And when they come down, they give off certain colors of light. And the colors of light they give off depend on the spacing of the possible electron shells in an atom. Okay, so for hydrogen, the electrons going from high energy all the way down to low to the bottom energy level we call the Lyman series. The Lyman series is primarily ultraviolet light. The Balmer series is visual light. The Paskin series is mostly infrared light. And so this is for hydrogen. And so that means the electrons go there, or they start. If they start at the bottom level and go up, they absorb ultraviolet light. If they start in the middle level, at second level and go up, they absorb visual light. If they start in the third level and go up, they absorb infrared light. Okay. Now this makes more sense, in class. I'm having trouble explaining really how this would work, but imagine that you have a spectrum, which is what we call, a rainbow of colors, and you just take out certain colors of light. Well, that's what would happen if you were to shine white light through a gas here like this. It would absorb only certain colors of light. And so there'd be these dark lines if you were to look at the rainbow of light that comes through. On the other hand, if the gas was just allowed to give off light, it would give off exactly those colors of light. And so that's the difference in emission and absorption. Emission spectrum absorbs certain colors of light. Absorption spectrum, it gives off, rather, emission spectrum, it gives off certain colors of light. Absorption spectrum, it absorbs certain colors. It has to do with the same atoms, so it's the same colors of light. And so you'd have a gas, for example. In fact, some streetlights do this. They just have a gas. You excite the gas to high energy, and the electrons go back to low energy, and they give off certain colors of light. And as they give off certain colors of light, your eye tries to put that together to make it look white. It's not really white because you actually tell there's only certain colors of light being given off. But that would be a hot gas gives off certain colors of light, and we call that an emission spectrum. All the molecules are bouncing around giving off light anyway, so just because it's hot, it gives off all different colors of light. Okay, But if it's not hot and giving off certain colors of light because it's excited, you only get these certain spectral colors. Now, if you take this rainbow here and pass it through the same gas here that's cool, you get dark colors. Now, that actually is something that's measurable, and we can do this on campus if we had a lab set up to do that. We can't do that here this summer because we're doing the coronavirus thing and not coronavirus, but we're doing the well, I guess it's coronavirus. We're staying home here, and we're not able to do that, but we could actually do this and actually demonstrate the different kinds of light. But what would happen is that the different colors of different sort of things would give off light differently. Okay, so one thing we discover is that every element in the periodic table has a unique set of colors of light because the electrons are all arranged differently. So that means you could shine light through that each one of these ends give off certain colors of light or to absorb certain colors of light. So that way you could tell what something is made out of. And so this was a huge step forward. And this is how they started figuring out what the sun's made out of. They looked at the sun and they recognized the spectral lines of hydrogen, and they recognized spectral lines of something they didn't know what it was, and they called it helium, named after the sun. It was only later they discovered helium on Earth. And so every one of these elements has a unique spectral set of characteristics. And so you can actually tell what something is by the spectral line. The sun, because the sun's hot, it gives off what we call black body radiation, all the different colors of light, but it is absorbing, the outer part of the sun absorbed certain colors of light, and that absorption spectrum there is due to what makes up the sun. So you can actually pick these things out like a fingerprint, and you can figure out what makes up the sun. And one of the things to discover is the sun is almost entirely made of hydrogen. And the second most common thing that makes up the sun is helium. And so the sun is hydrogen and helium, and then everything else makes up just a very small percentage of the sun. So the sun is mainly made of two gases, hydrogen and helium. And then we discovered that other stars are also made of hydrogen and helium. Understanding how spectral lines work also helps us figure out the composition of things. For example, when we look at the moon Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn, sunlight reflects off of Titan and comes back to Earth. Well, we know what the spectrum of the sun looks like, but there are certain dips in the spectrum that don't correspond to dips in the sun. And those dips in the spectrum correspond to, for example, we have a dip here for oxygen. That's actually in Earth's atmosphere because we have to look through our own atmosphere in order to see out. But the other dip there is methane. A couple dips here for methane. That is actually in the atmosphere of Titan. And it is this kind of study that allows us to actually be able to look from Earth at something that is billion miles away from us and still be able to look at it and say, oh, wait, we could figure out what makes up the composition of that world and the atmosphere of that world by looking at the spectrum of it. And this is the power of spectral analysis. And so astronomers don't just look at pretty pictures. In fact, many of the times what you're interested in with a telescope is not a camera at all, but a spectrometer to measure the spectrum of an object, because that tells you the chemical composition. Okay. Another thing that you run into with light is fluorescence. And so you get fluorescent light, and what will happen is it's similar to the emission spectrum of light. What you do is excite the gas. What happens is the electrons go to high energy. Instead of going from high energy back down to where they were and giving all the same wavelength, they can share some of the energy with their neighbors, and then they drop back with a different wavelength. And so with fluorescent light, you can absorb, for example, ultraviolet light and then give off visual light, which has less energy. And so that's the idea of fluorescence right there. since we're talking about light, might as well mention about LED lights, since they're becoming industrially more common. And what happens here is you have electric current going through the semiconductor. And as the current goes to the semiconductor, then electrons are moving through the semiconductor, and they're taking the spot of lack of electrons. In physics, we call this holes. And so they give up energy, and then when they give up the energy, that energy can be visual light. And so LED lights give off visual light by electric current going through there, and that is electrons going in and taking the place of lack of electrons. And so that's what's happening in there. And so they give off certain characteristic colors. In order to get white light out of an LED, you need multiple types of LEDs mixed together to give you the white light.